Round one, opening statements, uninterrupted, 7 minutes, each debater from each side speaking in alternate turns, beginning with the side for the motion, blame Washington more than Wall Street for the financial crisis. Our first debater, Niall Ferguson.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here with you tonight. Nothing would be easier than to blame everything on the bankers. Think of Richard Fuld of Lehman Brothers. In 2007, his compensation for the year was $72 million, the year before his firm collapsed, never to be seen again. Or James Kane of Bear Stearns, who made $290 million in the 9 years before his firm vanished without trace. Not only were the bankers greedy, we would agree, they were also, in many cases, incompetent. But I and my colleagues are not here to praise them or to defend them. We blame them for much of what has gone wrong. It's just that we blame the politicians more. We've already heard quoted tonight that wonderful saying of Chuck Prince, as long as the music is playing, you've got to get up and dance. But you have to ask yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, who was playing the music? You know, it's so easy to heap opprobrium on Wall Street right now. It's just too easy. And have you noticed? That's exactly what the politicians do. I couldn't help but notice in President Obama's inaugural address an allusion to greed and irresponsibility. And only yesterday, he was denouncing, and I quote, the recklessness and greed of the bonuses paid to executives at the insurance company AIG. It was just the same in the last Great Depression. I think of this as the slight depression. FDR, in his inaugural address, heaped scorn on the rulers of the exchange and the unscrupulous money changers. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to ask yourselves, why do the politicians always wax so indignant about finance at times like these? Could it just possibly be that they're trying to divert our attention away from Washington's own responsibility for the debacle? What I want to do in the brief time I have available is to invite you to consider the roles played by 4 institutions in bringing about this financial crisis, and I also want you to reflect on the location of those institutions. The first is the Federal Reserve Board. Its role has been to allow a housing bubble to inflate and burst. Between January of 2001 and June of 2003, the Fed cut its federal funds rate from 6.5% to 1%. Then over 3 years, it very gradually, by quarter points, raised rates up to 5.25%. In that time, ladies and gentlemen, house price inflation in this country rose from 7% a year to 17% a year, and it stayed above 15% a year right until January of 2006. This was the period when Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, proclaimed the advent of a great moderation in economic life. Yes, that was the title of his lecture in 2004. Some moderation. The location of the Federal Reserve Board is the Eccles Building, Constitution Avenue, Washington, D.C. The second institution that I'd like to draw your attention to is the Securities and Exchange Commission, which under Christopher Cox allowed the leverage in the banking system to spiral out of all control, from some 12 to 1 to, as we've already heard this evening, somewhere in the region of 20 or 30 to 1 in the case of the big investment banks. And that was a conscious decision by the SEC. The location of the SEC, ladies and gentlemen, number 100 F Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. My third prime suspect is Congress, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Congress, because it was Congress that wholly failed to supervise Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac those two essential institutions which underpin the United States mortgage market. On the eve of their destruction, Fannie and Freddie had core capital, as defined by their regulator, of $83 billion and supported around $5.2 trillion of debt and guarantees. In other words, they were leveraged 65 to 1. The location of the Congress, I'm sure you're aware of this, but I can't help but point it out, is Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C. And that brings me to another nearby location, the location of the White House. You know, the White House played an extremely important role in creating the subprime mortgage disaster. We want everybody in America to own their own home, declared President George W. Bush in October of 2002. Everybody in America. He challenged lenders to create 5.5 million new minority homeowners by the end of the decade. He signed the American Dream Down Payment Act in 2003. No presidential pressure, no subprime debacle. The address of the White House, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest, Washington, D.C. Well, ladies and gentlemen, bankers are nearly always actuated by greed, so, I'm sad to say, are many ordinary people too. But it's the role of government to strike a balance between market forces and stability. And I move in conclusion that we should blame Washington more than Wall Street for this crisis, not least because, in my view, Washington sold itself to Wall Street, and I very much fear is still in hock to it. I beg to propose this motion.